Today at the Rock Pit, I'm joined by Toby Jepson, the frontman of Little Angels, who are back. They're back, they're bad, and it's 2026. I never thought I would have this opportunity to speak to, I guess, one of my favorite bands from that late 80s, early 90s UK hard rock movement. Um, Toby, welcome to Australia, welcome to the Rock Pit, and welcome to episode 7 of 50 Shades of Slaids. It's incredible to catch up with you, and thank you so much for your time.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure, Andrew, and yeah, wonderful introduction. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it feels kind of a bit of a pinch me moment myself, really, to be able to have this conversation and be talking about the band getting back together. So yeah, really wonderful.
So it's 37 years, and when you put that into perspective, I mean, it was pre children for me. It was pre a lot of things, and Little Angels came along in a point of my life where music was everything. It still is, but it connected me with so many things. And my love of the band started back in 1989. I was working my first job. I was working as a junior buyer in a record store, and I distinctly remember being handed a copy of a 4-track EP
All right. Yeah.
before the album came out, and but from the Polygram rep, knew nothing about the band. He's just gone, play this on your way home, will you? You'll enjoy it. So he knew me well, and he steered me onto you guys. And sure enough, I pop it on, and the first thing I hear is, "Do you want to riot?" And it's like, my God, what is this? Kicking up dust next, good Lord, where does this stop? And then "Don't Pray for Me" comes on, and it's like, my God, there's another element to this band that I must know more about.
Mm.
Um, and obviously the fourth track, "Promises," that was on that sampler as well. Um, you know, for an album like for a sampler like that to make the impact that it did, um, it was really quite astounding. I mean, I was a sponge for everything music, and you had something different about you. What, in your own words, what do you think was the point of difference that Little Angels had from a lot of other bands that were happening at the time in London?
Well, that is a big question. I mean, I've often pondered this really because I don't think we didn't really have a very specific plan about what we wanted to be. Really, I think we were enthusiastic, excitable kids, who grew up with Van Halen and Led Zeppelin and Queen and Bon Jovi and well, actually, Bon Jovi were breaking at the time. We were just kind of getting ourselves on our feet, and we were just inspired by the idea of just like so many young people are, about what does it take to sort of be in a band that can make it, man, and all that sort of stuff. So when we were really driven to sort of just, I guess, find our own way forward. But I mean, I don't really remember there being a huge plan about what that would be. What it really was our enthusiasm, our dedication to each other. I mean, we were very good friends. We all went to school together, so there's a big, healthy part of the reasoning behind all of this because of that. The camaraderie, the sort of sense of what does it mean to be in a band, and to us, it fast sort of developed into this concept of all being together, all for one, and also growing up on the northeast coast of England, in a little town called Scarborough, it's cut off. It's not, it's not really near any major towns. The nearest town to us was York, which isn't big in itself, and so it felt like we were sort of taking on the world. And it was, and it was also that period of time in the UK was quite, I would say, probably suffering from the sort of politics of the period, and we certainly all felt that. And so to us, it was all, there was an excitement to, as we got towards the end of the 80s, as we started to emerge around about 86, 87, things started to feel like were freeing up in the UK. And so we rode that wave a bit, really. And a part of that was the ambition. And so we never faltered. We wanted to go out and play, and all we wanted to do was play, and all we wanted to do was write our own music and do what we could. But we were naive, we were young kids. We didn't know what we were doing. All we were really doing was having a go and hoping for the best. And but we were full of belief in ourselves. I think the one thing that Little Angels had at that time, which probably is part of the answers to your question, was that we really did believe in ourselves. We believed in the possibility, and that drove the concept of what the band was. And so, I sort of emerged as the principal songwriter, certainly in the early years, specifically to do with the lyrics. And so my whole thing was, how do we talk about being this age and trying to break out and take on the world and do something positive? And so we framed that, and I framed that around the concept of young people from a small town trying to take, going out into the big wide world. And I think that is probably a lot of the reason why it worked. And I didn't realize that at the time. I mean, weirdly, in the lockdown periods of COVID, through that terrible period, I went back and re-examined a lot of the songs I'd written when I was a very young person. And I started to sort of understand that most of the characters, like the Johnny character in Kicking Up Dust and the character in Don't Pray For Me, really, they were me. I wouldn't have ever admitted that at the time. I thought they were about us. But, really, it was kind of a singular thing. It was a very much a first-person narrative. And one of my publishers years ago, when we first got signed to Polygram Music, said to me, the thing is about you, Toby, you write conversational lyrics. You're a conversational writer, and it engages you in a conversation. It involves the listener in the idea of the song. Now, I'd never given that one moment's thought. I really hadn't. It was just something I instinctively did. I wanted to talk about my generation, the things I was going through, the things we were going through as people, and how that could then be positive and have sort of a sense of a sense of belonging, really, and wanting to take part. Because you've got to remember, the scene in the UK back then was very much London-centric. If you went and I can remember when we first went to London to play shows down there, if you weren't part of the scene, if you weren't hanging out at the Samaritz or at the Marquee Club, then you didn't belong. And of course, we didn't belong because we didn't know those guys. We weren't hanging out with the guys in Thunder or the Choir Boys. We didn't know those guys, not for quite some time. And so we sort of felt a little bit like mavericks, really. We're a little bit on the outside of it all. But one thing that we did realise was that they weren't any better than we were. They were just another band, And so, because there was that pressure that you had to go to London, you had to play, and and everyone in London had seen everything and nothing was new anymore and all the rest of it. But we just ignored all that, sort of like in a kind of naive sort of hope that we would somehow break through. And we actually did. I mean, because I think we were so healthily sort of confident that, and it wasn't arrogance. I mean, I'd like to point that out. We weren't arrogant. I really don't think we were. We were middle-class kids. Our mums and dads were teachers. We weren't dragged up. And it was, we had this sort of like very sort of, I think, balanced lifestyle and balanced attitude. So it wasn't arrogance. It was more, well, we think we can do this. And so I think all of those things became elements that drove the band and kind of gave it its thing. And as we went through the making of the records, through the next 5-6 years, that only grew and it only became more amplified as we became more and more confident. So it's a really difficult thing to answer. I hope that's a very convoluted answer, isn't it? But I hope that illustrates roughly what I think the band meant.
Yeah, absolutely. But then if you go right back to the very, very beginning, and I mean, it took me to step into Don't Pray For Me, to go and find Too Posh to Mosh, and scrolled through a bunch of my old Kerrang magazines and found a little mail order ad in the back of it and went, sure enough, here's my money, send it to me. I mean, back in the day when buying music really was an adventure, certainly from the other side of the world, was a fantastic insight to the early formation of Little Angels. Was there a reason that you wanted to keep that Too Posh to Mosh EP or mini album as something that was separate from the major label debut of Don't Pray For Me?
Well, I think it was inevitable that was going to happen because we were very pragmatic. I mean, extremely proactive about our development as a band, even when we were young. Even though, like I said, we were very healthily naive, and I say that because I think being naive in a rock band actually is really helpful in a strange way, because you have no borders. You just do what you want to do and try and hope for the best. And we were certainly that way inclined, but we were very practical. We went and we actually got there was a local guy that was a businessman that was a friend, I think, of Bruce's mum and dad, who offered us some investment, and so he gave us, I think it was £1,000, which back in 1986 was a lot of money. And he gave us this money, and we ended up making our own record. And it was such a convoluted going on back then, because of course all you could do was ring up this manufacturer from the back pages of the NME and say, "We want to make a record, man. What do we do?" Yeah. And and so we went in a studio and sort of hoped for the best and did what we could, and we put out the 87 EP, which with hand printed sleeves and all the rest of it. So when we got involved with a local record label called Power Station Records, which was in York, they said to us, "Well, look, you've already done this recording. Why don't we augment it with some more recording? We'll put it out as your first official release with a barcode on it and everything." And of course, we were like, "Oh my God, this is amazing! We've arrived. Everything's going to be amazing. We're going to be huge, But of course, it was an independent little label, and so Too Posh to Mosh became our kind of calling card, and it stood us in such good stead. I mean, when I listen to that record, it's a little bit embarrassing in some respects. I mean, the recording's not great, and you can sort of, it reeks of kind of like naivety, but there's something endearing about it. I mean, there's a couple of songs on that record. I think "Bad Are Just No Good," for instance. It's well ahead of our years, really. We don't even know how good that song was at the time. It was just a song that we wrote, We weren't sort of like focused on it, So I think when Too Posh to Mosh came out, and it really helped us. It lifted us out of the sort of, I don't know, the cesspit, if you like, of everybody else. We sort of got our heads above the parapet with that record. And it got us a lot of stuff. It got us into the Marquee Club opening for Guns N' Roses and Tesla. It was definitely part of the reason why we were asked to do those things. So that record really became a sort of like working demo in a lot of ways, a working sort of banner waver, to kind of get to the majors. And so when Polydor came calling, and we were sort of courted by just about every major label in London at the time. I mean, every label was after us at one point, and we ended up going with Polydor. And so that kind of started a different thing. Next minute we're in major studios. We're all of a sudden we're in actually with an Australian producer, James Jimbo Barton.
Yes.
And Jimbo, he actually, I mean, Jimbo's a massive part of we have a lot of connections to Australia in terms of the reasons why the band succeeded, because we have Mark Opitz, who produced the Big Bad EP, who of course worked with In Excess and all sorts of other bands, in Australian bands, and Jimbo, who was instrumental in the band's getting signed, because he did our very early demos for Polydor, the original version of Big Bad World, and he also did the first single, 90 in the Shade, as a producer. And Jimbo he was amazing. What an incredible guy to learn from. So, that we entered that world, and that world's so different. I mean, we couldn't believe the difference between the sort of, the autonomy of making your own music and putting it out and sort of hoping for the best, to then stepping up into a major label. And so the whole world around us changed. And so I think that's the reason why it sort of felt separate, because we really were an indie band before, if you like. So just having a go and hoping for the best. You get into Polydor, and all of a sudden you got the weight of Polygram Music, which is what it was called at the time, on your side, and everything becomes different. You're in board meetings, you sort of photo sessions, and you're talking to major producers, and it's like we were like rabbits in the headlights, man. I mean, I tell you, it was unbelievable. So I think the two sort of periods were very different, and we learned so much, Andrew, between that period of working with, especially when we met Jimbo and we were working with Jimbo on those early demos. He lifted us from being a kind of okay band who sort of knew what they were doing but had a long way to go. He absolutely, in almost like military precision, taught us what we needed to do, in the studio. And so I think we stepped up, and we became a different band. And and I think the experiences that we went through in the early part really, really held us in good stead for getting into a major label.
Yeah, fantastic. And you mentioned those first couple of really major supports, I guess the Tesla and the Guns N' Roses. in both cases, I mean, did you really have an understanding of what you were witnessing with those two bands and what they were doing in America? Both, very, very popular bands and very successful bands at the time. Tesla, I guess by '87, were a little bit more settled, whereas Guns N' Roses was still very, very raw.
Hmm.
Did that sort of hold any influence or any bearing or change, I guess, the way you thought you might be able to approach America?
Um, I wouldn't say necessarily about how we would approach America, but it was astounding experiences, and they both of those experiences, and include we also opened for Faith No More when they had Chuck Mosley in the band for the very first time they played in the UK, and we had a really good run of that. We were. And the guy that used to book at the Marquee Club, Bush Telfer, who became a real good mate of ours, he was just a massive fan of the band. And so he just used to put us on as the opening act on all of these incredible bands. And that run of bands that came through from America, Guns N' Roses, Tesla, Faith No More, there was two or three other things. We did Vow Wow and a couple of other bands. It was... We just hit this golden moment. And so the experiences of witnessing these astounding bands that at that time were nobody really knew who they were. Nobody knew what they were going to become. Of course, was instrumental in us developing. I mean, the Guns N' Roses thing is extraordinary. I mean, we went down to London. We got the call to go down and play and open for this band, and our manager at the time had said, "Look, you're going to open for this band called Guns N' Roses." And of course, none of us ever heard of them. So I went to my local record store and said to the guy Nigel, who's a friend of mine, I said, "Do you know anything about Guns N' Roses?" And he nearly fell off his chair. He went, "What, you're going to open for Guns N' Roses?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well," I went, "Yeah." I said, Who are they?" And he goes, "Oh my God, man, you've got to listen to this." And he put on the Live Like a Suicide,
Yeah.
I think, mini album on. And I was like, "Wow, it's everything I love. It's Aerosmith. It's a bit of Sex Pistols. It's God goodness me, I couldn't even put my finger on what it was." And then he goes, "But they've got this single out," and he puts, I think It's So Easy had just come out as a
Yes.
single.
Yeah.
And it absolutely blew me away. I thought, oh my God, this band are incredible. And we went down and played that show. And man, I tell you, to this day, Andrew, they are the greatest rock and roll band I've ever seen play live. It was breathtaking. They played under an hour. And by the time they'd finished playing each of the songs, I knew the words. They were that good. It was
Wow.
like, and we'd never heard these songs before. So Paradise City, Sweet Child of Mine. It was like, so that as an education was unbelievable. And I remember I spoke to Axl Rose after the show. I mean, because it was just in a club, they were just a
Yeah.
bunch of, they stank. I mean, they stank of the road, they were proper road dogs, And we were these sort of like middle class kids coming down from Scarborough. And we just felt about that big, we felt tiny, next to them after we watched them play. But I spoke to Axl and he was lovely. And I sort of said, "Oh man, you guys are amazing." And I remember saying to him, "How do you get that good?" And he said, "Man," he said, "we just rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed, and we had this lock up in the valley in LA, and we didn't go out onto the strip until we knew we were good enough, until we'd written those songs, until," he said, "we lived and we breathed and we slept all together in this lockup, and we just rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed." And you know what? We went back. I mean, you could have heard a pin drop in the van when we drove back to Scarborough that night, which was like 300 miles away. We drove overnight to home, and we just didn't. We were so in awe of it all, but it changed the way we did things. We
Yeah.
went back into our rehearsal room, and we started rehearsing 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, and that was entirely because of it, witnessing them and talking to those guys. And same with Tesla, same work ethic, same that American work ethic, that kind of like determination. We hadn't seen that or felt that before, and so just experiencing that as people and talking to those guys changed the band completely. Now, when we got to America, of course, it's an entirely different kettle of fish. I mean, we were very supported by Polygram in America, but sadly, I think really it was bad timing because they had their own bands. There were so many enormous bands happening over there at the time, Guns N' Roses included, that really we just got lost amongst the melee of it all. And they didn't really need another British band. It wasn't the same sort of thing as like Def Leppard, who appeared the generation before, or maybe 5-6 years before,
Yeah.
where there was kind of a need for them. There was that sort of European sound that they brought. They didn't need that anymore. There was all those bands, Extreme and blah, blah, blah. And so we sort of got lost amongst all that, and so never really had a good fair crack at America. And it's always been a very deep frustration to me, that really. But hey, you roll with the punches.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because the Do You Want to Riot had two video clips. There was one that was made for the American market, which was more of
Right.
an ice hockey themed one, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's right. We shot. We did. I mean, we were very aware of the fact that the image was everything, and we were very careful about that. I mean, I think we were smart enough. I think it's one of the things we got right, actually, was that we knew that the MTV generation needed to be served, and it was right at its height at that point. So videos were very, very important, and I've always been very much into film as well. So we a lot of it was right. Well, how can we make these stand out a bit? And so we were always pushing for that. And so, yeah, and Polygram were great. I mean, I've got to say, people slag off their record labels, but I've got not a bad word to say against Polydor, really. They worked so hard on us, and they really did try. And, the American thing was difficult, but they really put the effort in. We went over there and we toured with Yngwie Malmsteen over there, one of the first things we did specifically on the East Coast and into Canada. They put a lot of money into making videos. They put a lot of money into taking us over there to do press and promotion, but it just didn't click. It's one of those things where you just sort of go, well, what can we do? What more can we do? And they sort of lost heart in it, and the focus then became about Europe. It became Europe, and we sort of, that's where our market really grew, through Europe. And I mean, we didn't even get the chance to come down to see you guys, which was really frustrating. I mean,
Yes. Yeah.
it really was. I mean, and we got very close. I mean, I remember that we were, and this is totally true. We were going to do a world. We were doing like a sort of series of like showcases around the world, including LA and New York and various other places. And on that list was to come into Australia. And I think we were due to do two showcases. One in Sydney. One might have been in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't Melbourne, it might have been Brisbane. But anyway, on the eve of us setting off on this trip, the promoter that was putting on the shows went bust, and so they pulled the shows. And so we were due to come, but we actually had to. We weren't able to, because we couldn't reschedule the gigs or anything. So it was a real point of like, oh no, we can't go. Which is, again, because we had our connection through the producers, and I know Jimbo had always gone, oh, you guys would be great down there. You should make your way down. But it just didn't work. It just didn't happen for us, which was, again, very sad for us, really. But record companies are funny. Major labels back then, they were very, I mean, they held sway over everything, and so what they said went. We couldn't argue the toss. You know what I mean? There was no conversation. It was like, well, no, we're doing this. This is where you're happening, so we're gonna double down on that, and we're gonna make sure that works. Which, to be fair, it did. I mean, Europe in general, and obviously Great Britain and Japan were great markets for us, and but of course, two of the biggest English-speaking nations in the world, we didn't get a chance to really have a bite of that cherry, which is sad. But hey, like I say, I've got no regrets, really.
It's interesting that you sort of say the parallels of things not working in America. Thunder went through exactly the same thing. I mean,
Yeah,
Geffen
they
spent
did.
a lot of money in the US repackaging
Yeah,
the Backstreet Symphony as well, and they certainly gave it all, and that was a market that they could never seem to tap. And I guess that's the beauty of where we sat in Australia back at that time, is that we were getting things from both sides. We were getting stuff
yeah,
from Europe, and we're getting stuff from America, and it was all blending into one.
mm,
And I make mention of that time for me. I mean, yourselves and Thunder and the Choir Boys and the Almighty, and the list goes on, that were surging at that time. It was a completely different sound and style.
mm,
Uh, it was a little more reminiscent of the 70s for me, and the classic stuff that I had listened to, your Bad Companies, your Freeze, and there was a lot
yeah,
more relevance to that sort of stuff, and even the Stones.
mm,
But it's such an interesting time. And I mean, you either became divided. I discovered Guns N' Roses, fairly early on, and was lucky to see them on their first tour of Australia, where again, it's not only the loudest gig I ever saw, but it's probably the most jaw-dropping raw rock and roll show I think I've ever seen. Um,
mm,
and it's funny how that all happens, and they were such a pivotal change in the American landscape.
mm.
but when it comes to you guys, I mean, obviously the focus on UK and Europe certainly paid off because by the time we get to 1991 and you're releasing, you know, this one, Young Gods,
Mm.
things have really ramped up for you guys. You guys are touring hard. You're touring. You're playing some incredible supports, and you're selling out. You know, some incredible shows on your own.
Mm.
The success that you guys had, did you actually expect it? I mean, you talk about being very driven and focused, and the lesson that you learnt from Guns N' Roses. Was the trajectory that you were on something that you expected? Did it happen a little faster or a little slower, or did it feel controlled by the label at that stage?
It didn't happen quickly because the Don't Pray For Me album really, in the eyes of Polydor, was a failure. Because we just didn't, you know, I think we sold 40,000 records, which today would be like everyone would be jumping around the room, wouldn't they be? But you know, the reality was to them they wanted a gold album or something, and we didn't really meet that, and we'd had a kind of very checkered beginning to the band's recording career. We'd sort of had the whole thing with Jimbo, which was brilliant, and but the first single, 90 in the Shade, was kind of misconstrued. You know, the press couldn't quite understand what it was, and the sleeve imagery was kind of strange, and they thought we were a surf rock band and all this sort of weird stuff. And so 90 in the Shade, which I still think was a cool tune.
Great
It
song.
was kind of, yeah, but it was kind of, it somehow missed the slot a little bit, really. And so we ended up sort of, everyone got into a bit of a panic. I remember Polydor saying we spent a fortune making this one single, which they did. But we, you know, but it hasn't been a hit, which was to their great, you know, they were absolutely horrified that it hadn't been. And so we were then on the back foot a little bit, and it was like, well, what we're going to do now? Well, we've got to make an album, so we need a real safe pair of hands. And so we were sort of packed off to sort of decide. Well, not decide, but they said to us, look, you know, look through your favorite records and find some producers you think you'd like to work with, which is a stupid thing to ask a bunch of young kids. I mean, as if we knew what a producer, you know. I mean, I wanted to carry on working with Jimbo, but he wasn't flavour of the month by this point because, as far as Polydor was concerned, he'd lost him a lot of money. But so anyway, we ended up. Long story short, we ended up working with Eddie Kramer. You know, of course, you know, Led Zeppelin fame and Jimi Hendrix and all that. Of course, we were absolutely astounded by the idea that we could even work with someone like him. But unfortunately, that experience was an unmitigated disaster. It just didn't work. We didn't spark. He just didn't seem to get the band, and Polydor was spending money like it was going out of fashion. So we ended up having to sack that off. By this point, we'd wasted all the money of the first recording advance, excuse me, and they were in a tailspin, and so we ended up going into the studio and making that first record with Owen Davis, who was a sort of relatively unknown producer. I think he'd just done a couple of minor things, and we made that record very, very cheaply in a very short space of time. And we had to, I think we had to sort of go back to Polydor, and they gave us some money from the advance to make the second record, to make the first, because we'd spent so much money. So it was everything was in a real cluster. You know, it was one of those situations where we were kind of like out of control of that. They were telling us what we had to do, what studio we were going to go in, but yet their whole plan hadn't worked. And so we were in this situation where it was a panic. So when we released the first record, as much as I think it is a great record, I'm very proud of that album. You know, it was done purely on instinct. You know, we as a band went in the studio and did that purely on instinct. And I don't think Owen was an amazing producer. I don't think he wasn't a bad guy, but he wasn't really producing us. He was just kind of sitting there and pressing record, really.
Yeah.
And so the album sort of came out in this sort of very raw fashion, which I think did benefit us. But it failed. It did not chart. We tried to chart singles over here. Don't Pray For Me was a single, you know, Kicking Up Dust. Also, Do You Want to Riot? None of which went to radio and made any indent at all. And we were still playing in front of 150 people. So it was like we didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And so, but the change happened really when me and Bruce had co-written a song with Dan Reed because we loved that first Network album. I think it's a brilliant record,
Incredible
absolutely brilliant record. And so we'd sort of said, our publisher at the time, Lucy and Granger, said, look, if you want to work with any co-writers, I think you ought to, because you need the experience. And of course, me being me at the time, I said, well, I can write my own songs. You know, why should I work with somebody else? But of course, he was right, and I ended up working with Hugh Cornwell from the Stranglers and Dan Reed and various other people. It was a wonderful experience, and I really got into the idea of co-writing. So we did this song with "Radical Your Lover" with Dan. But it didn't go. We didn't record it very well on the first record. It just didn't. It wasn't a very good recording. So when we were in this panic mode at the end of the album's campaign, Polydor was saying, we need a hit, else we don't know what we're going to do. I think there was even a consideration that we may well have been dropped. So we sort of tricked them into it. We said that we needed to make some demos for the next record, and we took 500 quid or something from them from the demo budget, and we went and re-recorded "Radical Your Lover" with the horns and did a total rearrangement, which I've got to say, actually, a lot of the credit goes to Jimmy Dickinson, the keyboard player of the band. He came up with the concept about how to rearrange the song. It was a stroke of genius, actually. And we re-recorded that song, and that song, Polydor didn't expect it to be to do anything, and they reluctantly released it as a single, and it charted, and it completely changed the landscape for us. I mean, it literally took us from zeros to heroes overnight.
Yeah.
There was a DJ in the UK called Mark Goodyear, who was one of the biggest DJs at Radio 1, and he loved that song. And he essentially was responsible for the success of the band, really, because he played it and played it and played it and played it. And we went from literally playing, like I say, 150 people to playing to 500-600 people within a fortnight. I mean, it was ridiculous. And it just shows the power that radio had back then. It shows the power that the magazines had back then, because all of a sudden we were getting great reviews. The single was in the charts. We were playing in front of 500-600 people. So that set us on a course for this wholly unexpected success, and it was a complete chance. I mean, if Mark Goodyear hadn't have liked that song, or he hadn't have been in the office the day that single landed on his desk, I don't think I'd probably be talking to you now. Yeah. It really is that there was no plan. It was scattergun. What do we do now? Oh my God, what do we? It's like headless chickens running around the farmyard, But this is the way that the things happen. You take your chances, and actually, it was down to us that we became successful, because it was down to us to say we need to re-record that song because we think it's a great tune and it hasn't been done justice to. And we were right. And I have to say that after that point, Polydor listened to us a lot more than they did previously. So I think it sort of helped a lot, So by the time, Young Gods came around and we started to get into that record, we were sort of on our way, and we were appearing on... We were on Top of the Pops. We'd done Top of the Pops 2 or 3 times by this point, which was a huge TV show in the UK. Yeah. In fact, the only TV show in the UK that made any difference to your charting. And we started to become almost, I wouldn't say household names, but we were a band that people then knew. And so everything opened up for us. And so, entering in the second album phase and recording that record, we were very much in a far stronger position, and we were starting to get offers and bigger ideas, and we worked with some incredible. Jim Vallance wanted to work with us, for instance. So we wrote Backdoor Man. We wrote with Jim Vallance, and me and Bruce went over to Vancouver to work with him. And we sort of had the pick of the crop by this point, because we were now a band that were doing something, But like I say, not by design. It was a complete chance,
Yeah. It's incredible. And when you talk about going and reworking something like "Radical Your Lover," at that time too, are you starting to write and to prepare for Young Gods?
Absolutely. I mean, I by this point, what's always been great about Little Angels is that we love each other so much, and we were such great friends that we did realise that everyone had a role. Bruce always used to say to me, "I'm the riff writer. You're the songwriter. I'm the riff writer. Jimmy's the keyboard whiz. Bruce. At the time, Michael Lee, of course, the wonderful, sadly departed Michael Lee on the drum. He was astounding. I mean, just having Mike in the band was enough. But Mike and then Mark as a rhythm section, they were so locked in. It was so great. We all knew what our position were, and so. And I'd emerged as a kind of the principal songwriter. I'd written "Don't Pray For Me" on my own. I'd written "No Solution" on my own, even though it's got all the band's name on it. Actually, it's my tune. "Big Bad World" was mine. And so it started to sort of like slot into who was doing what. And so I was always writing. I always have done. I've always got half a dozen to a dozen tunes on the go. And that was kind of very much my modus operandi from day one, really, as I started to discover I could write songs. And so by the time we came to make the second record, a lot of it was there was loads of ideas, which was quite unusual for a band on a second album, because normally you spend all of your life writing your first one and then you're scrapping around for songs for the second, you know. But that wasn't the case for us. We had Boneyard was there, you know, Young Gods was there, you know, there was tons. I mean, if anyone's interested in the B-sides of Little Angels, you'll see that a lot of the B-sides were really essentially demos of songs that didn't make the albums. But there's a plethora of them. You know, there's maybe, I don't know, 6 or 7 tunes that we use as B-sides that never made the records because there was so much material available to us. So we were lucky in that respect, and we always used to react very well in the rehearsal room. If I brought a song in, for instance, which usually was the case, I'd bring something in, and then we'd all work on it. We'd work on it until the song was done, and then we'd put it on the list, and we'd move on to the next one. You know, it was very much that way of working. Get excited about something, make it as good as it can be, and then sort of like, okay, we've got that one, put it on the pile. What's next? It was like that, you know. So by the time we came to make Young Gods, it was like, wow, we've got all this material, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, when we talk about going to Boneyard, I mean, I absolutely love the way that, you know, Polygram in the UK, and as did all of the labels back then, you know, brought out these really cool, unique packages like the box set for Boneyard with the poster and the 12-inch and the extended mixes.
Yeah.
Surely, I mean, for you guys and for collectors and fans like myself, where you went and bought, you know, the different pressings and versions, it must have helped, you know, a fair bit of the way that you guys charted and sales and impacts. I guess it's a bit like today with coloured vinyl variants. There were so many different ways for you guys to reach and to sell. Boneyard itself, I mean, what a powerhouse song! That opening drum fill, I mean, just determines the tempo of the song, and that opening you know, scream of yours. It's like, oh my god, it's like, this is incredible.
Yeah.
It was an evolution in the band as well too. It was the starting of again, you mentioned Radical You Lover introduced the horns, and obviously that developed into this record a little as well, and certainly into the live show. And I mean, there are things like this that came out in Japan, the Hammersmith Odeon live EP, which, you know, really gave someone like me, who never stood a chance unless I travelled to the UK, of seeing or hearing you guys live, incredible tools. But, you know, from a growth standpoint, was there something that, you know, felt so natural in the way that you wrote? And you say that, you know, by the time that album had hit, by Young Gods had hit, you all knew your place and your role in writing and constructing songs. Did that make a big difference to the way that record sounded?
I think it did, and we were always very inventive, and we always had a very, very open mind about it. And of course, in the second album, we went back to Jimbo Barton, and Jimbo was an extraordinarily clever producer. And you're talking about the times before Pro Tools. He was cutting edge. He was using samplers, and he was using things like the AMS reverb machines and delay machines to sort of tune things and stuff like that, which was very, very. I mean, we were unaware that these things could even happen before, you know. And he was right on the cusp of what was absolutely happening. So working with Jimbo was again another really huge education on that record, and he recorded things so beautifully, and he was so meticulous. And so informative and so supportive and so completely optimistic about what we were doing that helped really drive us. And so that's very important, a very important part of the reason why that record sounds like it does. But I think the principle for us was that we'd been introduced to this world of music in a way hitherto we would ever experience. And what I mean by that is that when you sign to a major record label, you're getting you start to understand exactly what's happening, what's going on around the world. You know, your A&R are informing you who else has been releasing stuff. You get pre-release tapes. I mean, I got a pre-release tape of the Nirvana album, for instance, off Susan Collins, who was our A&R lady, and she gave me a pre-release board mixes of Nevermind, you know, that she got from her friend who was working on the album. Same with Jellyfish. Same with Metallica, the Black Album. We got an insider view of what was going on, and so we started to sort of understand where things were moving moving, how it was all sounding, who was doing what, who we thought was relevant to us, what the sound of things were, where it was going to go, etc. So you start to sort of get this sort of inside track of it all. And certainly Aerosmith were an enormous influence on Little Angels. I mean, the Pump album was, to us, was like the greatest thing we'd ever heard, and it was so inspiring. And so we wanted to make a record like that. We wanted to do something that complex, that powerful. Didn't know if we could or not, but that was our driving for. Because we recognized the fact that we were similar to Aerosmith as much as we were very song centric.
Yes.
It was very production driven. We wanted to go into that world. I mean, you know, we loved making the first album. It's a very raw record, but really we wanted to try and stretch our legs and see how far we could go. And Jim, as a keyboard player, was very interested in sequencing and all the keyboards and all that, what all that meant. But more than anything else, we were absolutely fascinated by arrangement. And we were all massive Beatles fans, and we used to use Sgt. Pepper as a point of reference all the time for how great a record can be, how songs can be arranged. So it wasn't just the normal standard, you know, run of the mill verse chorus approach. You know, it was very much a sort of, we got into the sort of, or not the science of it, because there isn't a science to music, but the kind of the layers below. You know, what it means to make really great records, and you start to sort of get an understanding of that when you really examine it and you're really absolutely saturated by it and you're immersed in that world. And so I think we did so much learning through that record, and we were absolutely determined to make something that would take us from where we were before to the next level. And we knew what we had to do. We knew we had to compete with it. You know, if you're going to compete with anyone, you've got to compete with the best. Yeah. So we had to compete with Pump. We had to compete with, you know, Appetite for Destruction and blah blah blah. We wanted to make sure that our chance was as good as it could be, but it was all to do with the art. It was to do with the artistic nature of it. We've all of us, and we still, I mean, I was talking to Bruce about this yesterday, you know, we still get excited like giddy teenagers whenever we put the first Van Halen record on, or we listen to any of those amazing records, Number of the Beast, Iron Maiden, and, you know, any of these amazing records that sort of like changed music. And the reason why we do is because we're in love with the art. I'm not in love with the commerce. I'm not a rich man. I never will be, and I never will be, because I'm more interested in actually making great work, you know. And I think that ethic that carried Little Angels above and beyond, actually, because we were not influenced by the sense of, well, if we sell 1 million records, we're all going to be millionaires. We didn't give a toss about any of that. We didn't know. We had no idea. It was far more important to spend day upon day, week upon week, month upon month on making our music as good as it can be. And do you know what? That's the only chance you've got. The songs are the only thing that matter, and that's the thing that I think I realised very early on, is that you're nothing unless your songs are the only thing that you work on. And, you know, there's 3 rules in rock and roll, and you know, that matter, and it's your songs, the songs, and the songs. Yeah. And we believe that wholeheartedly. So I do think that's why that record took people by surprise, and why we ended up being in Hammersmith Apollo within a couple, 2 or 3 months of releasing it. You know, it wasn't a mystery in lots of ways, because I think it's a very, very well made record. You know,
it's an incredibly well made record, and you know, I think the success of it and the juggernaut that you guys went on as far as touring was concerned was incredible. And it must be such a great sort of full circle moment where you go from, all right, we're dedicated to 8 hours a day, 6-7 days a week in a rehearsal room, to going out and playing 6-7 days on a stage to a room full of people that are singing your words back to you.
Well, honestly, you couldn't be more right. I mean, it's the most gratifying, most satisfying experience. Because here's the other thing: that kind of, because there's always some sort of yin to the yang, isn't there? I mean, we weren't the darlings of the press. I mean, a lot of the rock press in the UK they sort of treated it as a bit of a joke to start with, and there was, you know, we used to get great live reviews, but there was always a bit of a piss take going on about Little Angels, and I think a lot of it was to do with the fact we weren't part of that scene, we weren't part of that London scene. I genuinely do, but we proved everyone wrong, because, you know, everyone was laughing behind their hands when we announced our Hammersmith style tour, and our agent at the time, Mike Juden, he was a wonderful guy at ITB. He said, "Look, I think you can sell city halls," and we went, "Really?" He goes, "Honestly, I think," he said, "I think you're heading that way." He said, "Why don't we take a chance?" And we did. We announced the tour, and there was a lot of guffawing behind hands by the so-called professionals in the industry. But we sold the tour out in about a week and a half, you know. And so they got egg on their face, and all of a sudden, all those magazines who were refusing to put us on the front cover I mean, one magazine in particular, who will remain nameless, rang Polydor and said, "I will never put that band on the front cover of my magazine. I don't like them. They're not rock and roll enough, and I refuse to ever to support the band." And what the most gratifying thing was is when we ended up selling out Hammersmith, they had to put us on the front cover because it was commercial suicide if they hadn't have done so. And I'm not saying that with any level of vitriol. It's just that to me was what it was all about. It's like, because actually what really mattered, Andrew, was the fans. You know, we sold. Yeah. We had an absolutely dyed-in-the-wool, rock-solid fan base that we'd built over so many years, and those fans loved us, and they didn't give a toss what any magazine guy said about us. And so that's how we managed to sell those tickets, and that's how we managed to sell those records, because our fans absolutely loved the band. And so, you know, we've got a lot to thank the audience for that, and we've always. And we've been talking about it because obviously because of the tour in November, we've been talking about the same things. Is that, you know, we've come. You know, last time we played live in the UK was 2012. Well, we announced these we announced these dates, and within 24 hours we'd sold out the London show, and we were 60% sold out everywhere else. You know, so, and that was an immediate, oh my God, our fans are still there. You know, and that's complete commitment, that utter loyalty from our fan base is what made the band successful. And so you can. So ultimately, what happens is you can kind of forget all the stupid stuff that usually comes along as baggage, like whether your reviews are good enough, whether that stuff matters. Because to us, it didn't. We knew that we were a good band. We worked hard at being a good band, and so to play in front of those people and to get that action reaction. I remember I was talking to John Bon Jovi when we toured with Bon Jovi back in '93. I got to know John very well, and we were talking a lot about this stuff, and he said the same thing as me without being prompted. He said, look, you know, I honestly believe that the reason why we're here is because of our audience recognise the fact that we love them, that we want them to be here. It's an action reaction. We do something and they react to it, and that's what it's all about. And I was like, oh my God, I thought I was the only person who felt this. But the truth of the matter is, a band that was worth their soul understands what the relationship is between you and the audience. You know, it's not this kind of, because there are a lot of bands who go, well, I don't care what about my audience, man. They just turn up and I play, and that's what it's all about. You know, and you know whether they turn up or not doesn't matter to me. Well, it really matters to me. It really matters to me because they made us. Without the fans, there are no bands. You know,
no, that's exactly right. It's exactly right. That's the that's the essential of it all. So. And, you know, I really do admire, you know, bands that do cherish their fans and you know, are grateful and thankful for, you know, joining them on their journey, you know, and making their journey possible. I mean, obviously, without fans, without people picking up on songs, there's no second album, there's no third album, there's no
exactly
chance to reform, you know, and to relive these opportunities again. As we step away from, you know, the Young Gods album, we get the surprise little single of The First Cut Is the Deepest, which comes kind of out of nowhere. It certainly did here in Australia anyway. It came out of nowhere. And, you know, it showed another level of maturity with the band. And I think it was, in hindsight, it really was a precursor as to what was about to come with Jam. Was that something that was a strategic move, or was that song recorded for a specific reason?
Well, we'd obviously suffered the loss of Michael Lee. He left the band, and we were sort of in a little bit of limbo for a period of time, and so we were trying to sort of figure out what to do next. And you know, we met Mark Richardson, who ended up joining the band, who of course is in Skunk Anansie now as well. You know, Mark had been a friend of ours. I mean, I've known Mark since he was like 12 years old. In fact, I was the first guy that ever put him through a PA system. I used to run a little PA system in Scarborough, and he was it's true. He was in a local band called I think they were called Eiger, and I saw this young lad come in and play his drums, and he was fantastic. And you know, I always kept my eye on him, and we became really good friends with him. And he ended up being one of our roadies for a while. And so we sort of, in that middle period between Michael leaving and Mark actually joining, we tried tons and tons of drummers out, and we couldn't find anyone that suited the band. And so we ended up just asking Mark to sit in with us, really, because it just felt like the right thing to do. Never intending to ask him to join the band, because he was extremely inexperienced. But over a period of time, we thought, hang on, why don't we just ask him to join the band? It
Yeah.
seems like crazy not to, because he was getting better, and also he was under no pressure. So whilst all that was going on, Polydor were kind of panicking a bit because we weren't putting out music, and so we had a conversation with Lucy and our publisher and said, look, why don't we do a stopgap EP, and why don't we choose an artist? I think the conversation went something like, my memory of it was, why don't we choose an artist that we all collectively really really like as a songwriter, and why don't we do versions of that artist's songs? And one of the very common denominators was Cat Stevens, and so we were all loved those records. I mean, mainly I think because our parents had those records.
Yeah.
Is it Teaser and the Blue Cat or whatever it's called? So and we all went, oh my god, he's got some great songs. So we ended up sort of rehearsing, I think, half a dozen Cat Stevens songs, and we were going to put out an EP called Cat's Eye, which was Little Angels plays Cat Stevens. But for one reason or another, it didn't work. And then my recollection was that the German record label said that they wanted to have us as an exclusive single, and we'd recorded First Cut Is the Deepest as one of those songs, but we hadn't done the rest of them, and so we ended up sort of getting that track mixed and sent it to the German label, and they put it out. But then it filtered down back, it kind of got imported, and it wasn't ever released in the UK. It was put. I think it only came out as a sort of maybe a B-side on something or something.
Yeah, it
So
was based on something else as well. Yeah.
yeah, so it wasn't a kind of an official release. It was just something that sort of half worked and half didn't. But I love that version. I think we did a really great version of it. And you're absolutely right, though. Very astute observation. I think by this point we'd moved on to the next stage. We knew that we wanted to make a more, I think, less technical record. We wanted to go back to our roots a little bit on the third album, make something a little bit more authentic. Probably the wrong word, but a little bit more off the floor, and we knew we wanted to simplify slightly, and we toured so relentlessly on that record, and like you say, we'd done the ZZ Top Stadium tour with Bryan Adams, and we'd done a lot of our own touring across the world. We'd been to Japan. It had been pretty relentless, but the one thing that we had learned from all that touring experience was that we were maturing as people. Our tastes were slightly changing. The world of music, rock and roll, was changing around us. Nirvana were happening. The whole Seattle sound was beginning to come in, and so we wanted to sort of, I guess, react to that. And our reaction to that was we wanted to make a more natural sounding album, really. And so it set us on that course to make the Jam album because of that period, without a doubt. Yeah.
And when you look at the way that it segued with "Womankind" being the first single, I mean, what a beautiful song! What an incredible song! That probably has, one of the biggest earworm choruses. I actually put Jam on in the car over the weekend, and I've had the melody for "Womankind" and just even the orchestration feel stuck in my mind. It's amazing how it's come back like muscle memory. It's fantastic.
Oh,
But
thank you.
the Jam album is incredibly successful for you guys. It debuts at #1 on the UK charts. It gets reissued, I think, 6 months down the track with the Live Jam CD as well. And things are incredible. You're supporting Van Halen and Bon Jovi, and you're playing the biggest arenas throughout the UK and Europe. When you get to that point and you step out and you get the opportunity to step out onto a stage like Wembley Arena for the first time, does it take your breath away as a music fan? It would imagine it would for you as a performer.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, when we played, we had an extraordinary stroke of luck with Brian. I mean, I'd met Bryan Adams when we were making our first album. Actually, I literally bumped into him on the stairs at the studio we were working. It was Marcus Studios in London, in Fulham, and he was walking up the stairs as I was walking down them, and it was a really tiny little corridor, and I didn't even recognise it was him, but I literally bumped into him as I came around the corridor. I went, "Oh, I'm really sorry, man." He went, "It's okay, man," and I was, "Oh my god, it's Bryan Adams!" And of course, I'm huge fan of Reckless, huge fan of Cuts Like a Knife. I couldn't believe, and he went, "What are you doing here?" And I went, and I was lost for words, completely starstruck by meeting him, and he was like such a cool guy, and he was like, can I come up and listen to what you're doing? I went, of course you can. That would be an absolute honour, you know. So, of course, he comes up and sort of hangs out with us all day, and he ended up editing one of the tracks. He ended up doing an edit on quarter inch of the track Promises, and he came up with a couple of ideas that we could add to the backing vocals for that song. And he was just like the coolest bloke, and just so kind and so nice. And me and him just stayed in touch from then on. We got on like a house on fire. So we sort of exchanged phone numbers, and he'd ring me up, and I'd ring him, and blah, blah, blah. So that relationship sort of developed over a long period of time. So when it kind of came to the end of we met him again on the ZZ Top tour that he was special guest on when we were on the Young God period album campaign. And of course that reinvigorated our relationship again, and he was like, oh, you know, we've got to stay in touch. And so when we came to the Jam album, he was an enormous artist by this point, because of course Everything I Do for You and Waking Up the Neighbours had just become the biggest record in the world, and he was still ringing me up, and we had this great relationship, and we were working with Ken Lomas on the Jam album, and Ken is part of that Vancouver sound. It was like him and Mike Fraser and you know, Brendan O'Brien and all those guys, and Bob Rock. They all worked out that same stable out of Little Mountain Studios. And so Ken said, look, you know, Brian's in town. Why don't I give him a call, see if he wants to come down? I went, oh, yeah, that'd be great. So anyway, Brian comes down at the studio, and we're in the midst of making the record, and he agrees to sing on Too Much Too Young, which is obviously one of the big singles from that record. And he was again, the coolest bloke, so generous, so helpful. And of course, one thing led on to another, and he invited us on that tour. Now, he did this big stadium, for those who don't know, he did a big football stadium tour of the UK, and it was enormous. It was, I think, one of the biggest tours of its type ever to have happened in the UK. He played, I think it was 8 or 9 football stadiums, including Wembley. And so we were in the middle of making the album. We hadn't finished it. And he said, look, come on tour. So we took a break from making the record, and we went out and we played. I think we played Too Much Too Young. Might have done one other song from the record. Might have just been Too Much Too Young. But we debuted it at stadium level, and we hadn't even finished making the record, right? So we went out. I can remember we went out onto that stage. It's you know, Wembley. I mean, you've got to remember, to the British, Wembley Stadium, and it was the old Wembley Stadium, the one that was built in the 1930s or whenever it was, you know. It was an iconic structure, not just an iconic venue. It was an iconic structure, and we witnessed various bands. You know, Live Aid had taken place from there,
Yeah.
you know, et cetera, et cetera. So the history associated with that place, the fact that it was always the cup final football. Not that I'm a football fan particularly, but you know, the cup final's a big thing for the UK, you know, et cetera. And it always used to take place in Wembley. To then play on that stage in front of an audience in that venue. It's still, I mean, I'm getting the chills now. It still puts the hairs on the back of my neck, because we went out in front of that audience. I mean, we on that tour, it was us, Extreme, and Squeeze. So we were I think we were first on. Then it was Squeeze, I think. Then Extreme, and then Brian. And the place lit up. I mean, the place went mad for us. We couldn't believe it. It was the whole place was singing the tunes. You know, it was a moment of, oh my goodness me, we are bigger than we think we are. It was like, these people know who we are. I mean, it was just extraordinary. And it's very true when people say that phrase, you raise your game. When you're given that energy, when the audience lifts you as a band, when you get lifted by the energy of an audience, you yourself, something magical happens. Some switch goes on in some ethereal or some spiritual place in you, and you lift your game. And I can remember like singing like I'd never sung before. It just felt like, it certainly felt like that's what it was. And I was looking around the guys at the band, and of course you've got to remember this stage is enormous. You know, you're not in a club.
Yeah.
You're on this enormous stage, and the sound is rocketing around this huge football stadium through these enormous speakers. You can hardly hear what you're doing because you've got like tiny little monitors, etc. This is well before in-ear monitoring, and but yet the whole thing's working. The whole thing's glued together like it's Velcro. You know, it was just unbelievable, and the experience of that tour was unlike anything I've ever experienced, and it really again set us on a real course of proper confidence, because we came out of that sort of tour knowing that tens of thousands of people had heard Too Much Too Young for the very first time, and ahead of release of the record, you know. So it just made a massive impact, and we were bowled over by the whole experience, and and of course the record went to number one, and Womankind was the biggest single we had ever charted, and yeah, it was an extraordinary time, and again, thanks to the fans, simple as that.
Yeah. And again, following on from that, I get another taste of the band live, which is jammed on film, the VHS at the time. And I mean, again, just watching, just being on this 5 year journey at this stage, or 4 year journey at this stage with you guys,
Mm.
and seeing the way that you've grown and developed is quite astounding. Was there one thing from Jam that you wish you could have done differently, or was there anything that you wish that maybe had been handled differently by the label?
Yeah, there was quite a few things. I mean, I think we got away with it with the skin of our teeth in a way, really. But I do think Too Much Too Young and Womankind were and I'm not saying this to stroke myself on, but I do think they're really great tunes. And I think they held sway over the whole of the album, really, because those two singles lifted the record into a different place. Womankind specifically, and the proof of the pudding's is in the listening, really, isn't it? It's a great recording, that is, and I think the song is. It's one of the I think it's one of the best things I've ever written, and I don't even know where that song came from. It kind of got visited upon me, really, and I didn't know whether it was ever going to suit the band, but it did, and it really worked. And so, I think the album's held up by that. If I was to go back on that album, I would have left some of the songs off, and I perhaps would have put some different tunes on it. I think it's maybe a little too soft for the band. I think there was a. I'm not saying that's a mistake, because you mark time when you make records, and you make decisions based on that period of time. You can't obviously you can't undo anything. But if I don't think I would have released Soapbox as a single. Soapbox is a bit of an anomaly for me, really, because I wrote that song. I wanted it to be like the Kinks. It was written to be a bit Ray Davies, really, a bit sort of Waterloo Sunset, that sort of thing. I wanted it to be like that, but it turned into a really lightweight pop song, and it never really reached the places I wanted it to reach, and I was horrified when they wanted to release it as a single. I got to be honest, and I think we should have released "Don't Confuse Sex with Love" as a single, and etc. etc. And there was things that was confused about that album, like the guy that produced it, Ken Lomas, he did a mix of the album, and it wasn't very good, and so we had to go remix it, and we had to go to Vancouver, and we went to Little Mountain, and Mike Plotnikoff and ourselves mixed that record, really, and it was a bit of a stumble. I mean, for all the success of the record, it's my least favorite of our albums, I've got to say. I mean, and I'm very, very proud of it, but I think we were sort of reaching a bit of an impasse between us all. We were now growing into young men. We weren't 20 years old anymore. We were all 26, 25, 26, and we were getting older, and things were changing, and our attitudes were changing. We were maturing. There were some cracks appearing along the way, which I'm quite happy to talk about. And so it as successful as it was, it's not our finest moment, I don't think. But I do think we managed to survive it because Too Much Too Young and Womankind specifically were such great songs. I mean, there is some great stuff on there. I love, Don't Confuse Sex with Love, and then a couple of other tunes, But if I had my time again, I would have put some tougher tunes on it. I would have made it a more rock and roll album, I think.
Yeah. Interesting you say that. I mean, I think it again, as I said, it showed a level of maturity that I felt really natural again, for everything that you guys had done, and sat really well with me at the time, and still does, which is and for me the testament of a great record. Something that you can come back to 32 years later and still go, damn, that's good. That's still,
well, thank you for saying that. And of course, I guess the fans' perspective and your perspective is always going to be different from the band's itself. And I speak at these things with great joy, and I cherish every moment that we had in the band, really. And I think I really cherished the making of the Jam album as much as I did every other one. But times were changing, and we were changing, and I think that's half the battle when you're in a band, is how do you manage yourself. As much as managing the times around them, around the music, because all these things become part of the reason why you're dedicated to something or not, and And I think by the end of that record, we were all a bit exhausted as to what to do next. And of course, we didn't do anything next, really.
Well,
So,
no, there is
uh,
one more release from the band. Well, there are actually two more releases from the band. There's the Little of the Past
yeah.
compilation,
Hmm.
which was, I guess, if you look at it in hindsight, there are these subtle little hints that there may have been a little bit of trouble in Little Angel's Paradise, I guess, that we'd seen coming off Jam. Um, a little from the past is it sort of hints, but it's like, is it going to stop here? And and when you get the re-release of Two Posh to Mosh re-release, you sort of feels as though that things are trying to be bookended to a certain degree, or that certainly that was a feeling. And by the time 95 came around, the band were at a standstill and no more.
Mm.
What actually led to the breakup of the band? Because it seemed so united up until the end of that Jam cycle.
Mm.
From where we sat, I guess, from what I was reading in press and media, everything was hunky dory in the world of Little Angels, and that there was going to
Mm.
be another album.
Mm. Well, I mean, goodness me, it's a very hard question to answer in lots of ways because it was very complicated. I mean, there was some fracturing of relationships, which is inevitable when you've spent 24/7, 365 days of the year with the same people for 5 years. And it doesn't matter if you are the best of friends. Those things are very difficult to sort of get over. And and like I say, we were getting older, and things were changing within us, just us as people. And the stock answer has always been that the music scene had changed so dramatically that nobody wanted hair rock bands anymore that played guitar solos. Well, I don't really believe that. I mean, to my great sort of sorrow, I don't really know why we split up. I've got to be honest, it's a strange thing. There was a lot of machinations going on in the background. There was, we're obviously surrounded by not just ourselves, but also an awful lot of other people that are in control of various aspects of our career and our lives. And some of it wasn't great. And, but the fact of the matter is, it was down to us whether we wanted to carry on or not. And we reached a sort of bit of a moment where it felt impossible to carry on because the record company were losing a bit of faith. The music scene was changing, but I don't think it was dramatic enough in the way that people talked. I mean, I often sort of say, those 7,500 people or whatever it was that turned up to the Royal Albert Hall, they weren't all of a sudden going to start wearing stripy jumpers and staring at their shoes because Nirvana had made a record. They were still going to be there as our fans, and I don't understand where the disconnect came from, really. And so I felt very... I naively and sort of sadly feel that I didn't do enough to try and save the band from itself in lots of ways, but I didn't. And it's a source of great sadness for me that we weren't able to pull ourselves together really and bang our heads together. Someone should have banged their heads together and say, "Don't be so bloody stupid. Carry on." What? It doesn't matter that the scene is changing. Just take a bit of time off. I mean, the reality is, I'm big mates with Joe Elliott from Def Leppard, and he said that's exactly what they did. They said we could see Nirvana coming over the horizon, and we were like the absolute antithesis of what they represented.
Yeah.
He said, and all we did was we just downed tools for a while. We just stopped doing what we were doing, and we just took a bit of time off and rethought it all. And then they came back with a slang album and whatever it was, and made a different fist of it, But they didn't stop, and I think we could have done the same. But of course, it's the benefit of hindsight. Of course, it is.
It is.
But the reality is, Andrew, is that things change, and bands operate in a bubble, and the way that the fans see it isn't the way that it actually really is, and you have to sort of look at that. There's lots of emotional things that go on and lots of very difficult things to overcome. And I still don't think I was mature enough to deal with it. I mean, I've been sat in that bubble like we all had for so long, being protected from the rest of the world in lots of ways, just doing our thing. That once the bubble bursts and you come out, you're sort of blinking into the daylights. You sort of, what the hell happened? Where do we go from here? And it felt a bit like that. So when the band did split up, I felt like I went into a bit of a tailspin, really, and sort of like lost touch with the guys for a while, which I feel very sad about. But that's the way it worked, and putting out the Too Posh to Mosh, Too Good to Last record was just really, it was a mistake, I think, in lots of ways. I mean, there's 3 songs on that record. You know, I Want Love, All Roads Lead to You, and Forbidden Fruit. That were demos that I'd written. I'd written those songs, and they were demos for the next Little Angels record. I was all ready to go, you know. And 2 or 3 of the songs that I'd written for the next Little Angels record ended up on my first solo album, Ignorance is
Ignorance is
Bliss,
bliss. Yeah.
which is kind of, you know, some people are more equal than others. You know, 2 or 3 other ones. You know, a song that I wrote with Bruce. You know, Save Me From Myself. You know, so that could have been a Little Angels album, frankly. You know, it was obviously a bit darker than Little Angels, but you know, the bones of it was there. But it all came crashing down, and you know, I can sit here and I can sort of try and analyze it, but the reality is that when things aren't working, they're not working for
No.
whatever reason, and you sort of have to you have to be brave enough to sort of go, well, what do we do about this?
Yeah.
And we had to step away, you know.
Yeah, it's funny that you mention your solo album because it's one of the next things. It's like, you know, everything from the title, Toby Jepson, and the whole truth, and an album title of Ignorance is Bliss. It sort of sent a bit of a subtext, I guess,
Do
in
you
the way.
reckon?
And I guess my question there was that, you know, was some of that material, and you've just answered it, slated to be the next Little Angels album.
Oh, yeah, absolutely it was. I mean, you know, you know, Out of Sight, Out of Mind. I can remember playing Out of Sight, Out of Mind as an electric riff on stage in a sound check with Little Angels, but it just, no one was interested because it was just we were you know, towards the end of the band's career when we did those last couple of touring outings. It was tough. You know, we were not getting on great, and it was hard. It was hard work, and even though I was trying to remain optimistic, no one was reacting to it. And like I said, there's lots of very private reasons for which I don't want to go into,
No,
and there's no need to, because there's, you know,
no,
we're all great mates again, and it's all fantastic, and there's no reason to. It's very private, but you know, I was preparing for another album. I was like, oh, we can make this work, you know. But of course we couldn't. But of course, you know, the great thing for me was that period after the Little Angels, when I made that record, and when I think Bruce would say the same about when he made the Blow records, is that
yeah,
that was the big, like, the shackles are off. You know, we could be different people, we could say different things, we could say it in a different way, and I certainly matured in that year it took me to make that album. I matured as a writer in that period in a way that I never anticipated, and I do think Ignorance is Bliss is a kind of very tough, very sort of quite a dark album, which is absolutely about my terror about what I was going to do next, and I've always worn my heart on my sleeve, and so it was a kind of response to what had happened, you know. But hey, like I say, you know, you've just got to roll with the punches. You've got to go where it all goes, you know. And there we are.
follow the road that leads you, you know. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely. Now, talking about the first time you guys got back together in 2012, was it sadly at Michael Lee's funeral the first time that all 4 of you had sort of been back together and had a chance to, I guess, hash out and rekindle a friendship?
Absolutely, it was. I mean, you know, I hadn't sat, like I say, to my absolute detriment. I hadn't stayed in touch with the guys at all. I'd had fleeting emails, you know, once emails started to become a thing. I'd had fleeting connections to Bruce and fleeting connections to Mark, and I'd met Jim at a wedding at one point, and it was all quite awkward and a bit difficult. But it was just absolutely ridiculous. It was mainly of my own making. I'm quite willing to admit that I kind of think I was depressed, really. I think I'd had a bit of a breakdown about it all, really, because up until that point, you know, that the band had been my entire world. You know, it was everything I ever wanted, was to be in a band and to be with my friends making a racket and having some fun. And when it all came crashing to the ground, it sort of really, really knocked the stuffing out of me, really. And I think it probably did to the rest of the guys. But you know, you've got to pick yourself up and carry on, and you've got to find a way to do that. But my way of doing that was actually to sort of, I felt so distraught about it that I sort of wanted to separate myself from them, rather than sort of going the other way and saying, look, hey, let's talk about this, let's try and get over this. I didn't do that. I should have done. I wasn't smart enough at the time. And so when, you know, the sadness of Michael Lee passing was the catalyst. I mean, my agent at the time, I mean, it's bizarre, really, because around about 2000, I forget when Michael passed, in 2011, I think, or was it 11? I think.
11, yeah.
I'd been working with a guy called Steve Strange, who was a big agent, I'd been in Fastway with Fast Eddie Clarke, and I'd done a lot of touring. I'd been in Gun for a while. I'd done the Dio's Disciples thing and all the rest of it. So I'd kind of had a new career that had come out of nowhere, and that was largely down to Steve Strange's influence. And he was an incredible mentor for me. And I remember Steve ringing me up and saying, "Have you heard the news?" I said, "Well, I don't know." And he goes, "Well, Michael's been found dead, and he's in his bedsit." And I mean, I burst into tears. I mean, Michael was singularly I think, probably the most talented musician I've ever worked with. He was extraordinary. He was preternatural. Hard to describe what that lad brought to the band. I mean, I always used to think to myself, even if I had a bad throat when we went on stage, I used to think to myself, well, at least we've got Michael on the drum kit, because that'll keep people occupied. because it was so amazing to watch. Just a stunning performer, and just a brilliant technician, and such great feel and soulful, and he had everything, that guy did. And so when he left the band, it destroyed us. We were really upset about it. But he did the right thing, actually. In hindsight, I mean, he was arguably. I mean, Jimmy Page said he was the greatest drummer after John Bonham. I mean, what an accolade! It's
Well, yeah.
something to be said, that is. And so to end up him working with Page and Plant and all that, where it was really quite extraordinary. But I missed him. I missed Michael a lot. He was great fun, and to know that he was no longer on the planet was really awful. And it completely washed away any feelings of animosity towards anybody. I just thought, no, this is ridiculous. We've got to go to the funeral. So the first time I saw the guys since the bands had split up was at Michael's wake. Well, at the funeral, And as we were walking into the crematorium behind Michael's coffin, they played "Don't Pray for Me," over the tannoy sort of thing. And I again, I was in tears. It was just an extraordinarily emotional moment. And so, we end up at the pub in the wake afterwards, talking it all through. And I sort of said to everyone, I don't even know why we ended up fighting. And I know neither do we. So it's like one of those moments we all went, what are we thinking? This is completely ridiculous. And so, literally over a pint in a pub, we all went, let's just bury the hatchet and let's be friends again, sort of type of thing. Yeah. And it went on from there, and really, there was an immediate reaction, an absolute immediate reaction to wanting to do something with each other again. It was really, really quite extraordinary. And within about 6 months, we were talking to Andy Coppin, and Andy said, "Look, if you guys want to get back together again, I'd love to host you at Download." And of course, we played the second stage at Download to a rapturous reception, which then led on to us doing the tour in 2012 at Christmas time. But I suppose the thing to say about that tour was that it was instigated by this emotional outpouring of love and caring for each other again. And all I really wanted to do in that tour was put my arms around them all and just welcome them back in as friends, and us to become a band again, and just to appreciate each other. There was
Rekindle.
Exactly that. Rekindle, reconnect. Look at each other in the eyes and recognise what we managed to achieve together and how extraordinary it was, because not many people do achieve what we did. Even though we weren't the biggest band in the world, we did achieve something quite extraordinary for the time, and that was what was most important. So really, the tour in 2012 wasn't really something that we did a deep dive into. We just wanted to go out and play those songs again, and it was also sort of bracketed with this kind of concept that it was the only tour we were ever going to do, and I think that was a bit of a daft thing to say at the time, but I think it mattered. We wanted to sort of draw a line under something. So going out and playing, we didn't have Mark in the band because he wasn't able to get out of his obligations to Skunk Anansie, so we had Dominic from Reef playing the drums on that tour, and it was a great tour. Don't get me wrong, it's absolutely wonderful. And it was really great to reconnect to the fans, and we sold most of the tour out. It wasn't a complete sellout, but it did pretty well. And it rekindled the name, and it got people interested in us again, So I think, job done in lots of ways, but this time is different.
How so? Is probably the big question there, 13 years is a long time.
Oh, mate, honestly, how long have you got? God, dear, listen, it's like it's a phrase I absolutely love, but I've been saying it quite a bit in interviews. Like, trying to keep a band together is like trying to herd cats with a fork. You know, it's almost impossible, because, and of course, we've all moved on. Everyone's got jobs. Bruce and Jim are very successful sort of in music education. I mean, Bruce is a powerhouse in music education in Europe. I mean, he formed the BIM organization, which is all over the world now. And then he sold that business, and then he set up Water Bear, which is an online and well, it's not just an online educational business. They've got facilities in the UK in various cities. So he's done amazingly well. Extremely intelligent, extremely smart man, and has built a brilliant business off the back of music education. And Jim, his brother is a doctor of music now, and he runs the contemporary music course at Bath Spa University over here, and he's a highly regarded sort of professor of music, and it's extraordinary what they've managed to achieve. And then Mark Plunkett's gone off and become a pop manager, for Ronan Keating. He's managed Ronan Keating for years, and he's very successful at that. And me and Mark have just continued to be lifers in the music industry as players, So it's very hard to manage. How do you bring all that together? How do we make all that work? And but since 2012, we did say to each other, a couple of years went by, and we were all back on the phone to each other saying, "Oh, maybe we should do something else. Maybe we could. Can we? Is there anything? Can we do anything?" But you have to find a time when the planets all align. It's a bit of a cliche, but it's totally true. You have to find a moment where everyone is like in the right place in their head, in the right place emotionally, in the right place from a professional point of view. And it's not easy. I mean, honestly, the amount of Zoom calls like this that we've had, where we've sat here and discussing the possibilities of doing it, have been. I mean, I've lost count. And that's been going on for the last probably 5 years. So. And every time that we've done something, we've got on the phone or we've got on the Zoom to talk about getting back together to do something, there's been something that's just an obstacle's got in the way, whether it's a kind of private thing, whether it's a medical thing, whether it's just circumstances,
Yeah.
And it hasn't been for the want of trying. It's just been not possible until last year, when all of a sudden the clouds cleared, the sun came out, and we had a couple of Zooms, and it was like, we actually could do this. What does everybody reckon? And of course, the conversation was very excitable, and Mark Richardson was really keen, which was crucial to us. We were all really, really keen. Everyone seemed to think that there was holes in the calendar appearing, that we could make this work. But my stipulation really was, one of the things I brought to the table was, I don't want this to be one tour goodbye. I think there's a lot more here that we could have. I think we could look at this as a slightly more long-term thing. I mean, I've been doing Wayward Sons for the last 5 years, longer, 10 years actually, on paper. And I didn't want that to get interrupted, but at the same time, I saw the value in getting Little Angels back together properly. But that's the thing, I wanted to do it properly. I didn't want it to be, we'll do one tour and that's all we're going to do. I said, look, there's a big hole in the market in lots of ways. Where's the kind of song-centric melodic rock bands anymore? Aerosmith are not doing anything anymore. Whitesnake have gone, etc., etc. So it made a lot more sense, and we started talking to people, including managers and agents and our friends in the promotion business, and everyone was really, really positive. And so we just made that decision. It was like, well, okay, well, all right, well, let's not say it's one tour. Let's talk about a longer-term goal. Do we really think we can do that? And I went, why not? I'm only in my late 50s. I haven't got a walker. I don't have to go on stage with a walking stick. I feel just as fervently attached to the idea of being a musician and in a band than I've ever done, So, but it took the rest of them to feel like that as well.
Yeah.
I mean, they've all got to feel like that. And I can remember Bruce saying to me 2-3 years ago, I don't know why you haven't put a version of Little Angels together on your own. I said, because I wouldn't do it without you. And I wouldn't.
Yeah,
why would I?
Some things just shouldn't be touched, Yeah.
Totally that, and that to me is about respect. It's about loyalty. It's about actually having the right complexion. Because I could have gone out and done Toby Jepson's Little Angels. Believe me, I've been offered a lot of money to do that, but I had to turn every single one of those down because I just think it's completely ridiculous.
Yeah. I
started that band with those guys in Scarborough, and if we're going to do it together, we're doing it together, and that's it. And so that's where we're at. And so the whole idea really sort of took on a life of its own, and we sort of got engaged the services of Andy Coppin, who's a promoter, fantastic promoter in the UK. You probably never heard of Andy's name, but he used to book he used to book the Download Festival, and he was one of the most important promoters in Europe, really, and one of the most important people in the music industry, full stop. And Andy manages Sleep Token now, and
Yeah,
so he, he's a real big mate of ours. He's a Lincoln lad like I am, and so I've known Andy all my life. And so Andy just went, "Yep, let's do it. I want to be involved." And so you get someone like a heavyweight like Andy involved, and Ian Richards at the Academy Group, and
yeah,
various other people from the promoters that we're working with in Europe, and they're all like, "This is going to work. You're going to do this." And of course, we announced the dates, 12 dates, and like I said, London sold out in less than 24 hours. We just saw an absolute outpouring of emotion about the idea of the tour, and it looks like we're going to sell out 6 or 7 of the shows by next week. We've still got 8 months to go before the tour happens. So it's
absolutely.
amazing. And we're now talking to various festivals around the world about doing European festivals. We're talking to record companies about and this is a bit of an exclusive for you, but we are thinking about making a new Little Angels record. I mean, I don't know when or how that's going to happen yet, but we are talking to labels, and we've got a lot of interest about that. I really want to do it. I think Bruce really wants to do it. I think everybody really wants to do it, but that's a different kettle of fish, because we've got to be able to sort of somehow take what Little Angels were before and bring it into what we are now.
Here we are now. Yeah,
But without ruining what it was before. Do you know what I mean? It's not
yeah,
actually as easy as you think. I mean, I could take any song off of the Wayward Sons album and probably turn them into a Little Angels song without a doubt, because I just write songs. I don't write specifically for Wayward Sons or specifically for Little Angels. I just write my songs, But there is a lot of things to consider here. We've got to consider the sound, what it meant, how people recognise that sound. How is it faithful to the past? But how do we bring it on to something that's inventive and new and going forward? So there's a lot to sort of chew through. And one of the things we're thinking of doing at the moment, we've found a way of sort of bridging the gap. We're thinking of doing some re-records of some songs we felt didn't have enough of an outing before, that are came from all of the albums. And so there's a little bit of an idea about that at the moment, where we might do some recording this year. Maybe like a digital only release to start with, just to test the water, to see how well it comes together. But all the time, I'm thinking about making an album. In fact, I've written 3 songs already for it. So I'm sort of
wow.
thinking very much as a kind of like forward motion thing. Like I say, as a caveat, I don't know when, I don't know how. It might never happen, but if I was to put money on it, and I'm not a betting man, but if I was to put money on it, I'd say there's an 80% chance it's going to happen. So.
Fantastic. That's incredible news. And one of the questions that I did have, but when you say you're 8 months away from the tour, and shows are selling out so quickly, it's got to be such an incredible thing, especially in the state the world economy is at the moment. I mean, to know that people are that committed and still believe and so excited. I think when we first announced that these shows were going to happen, I think I said to the guys at the Rock Bed, it's like, so you're going to get me to go over and cover it?
Of course they are. That's exactly what should happen.
That's exactly right. And then I got told by Mark Dickens, he said, only if I can carry your bags.
Brilliant.
So you never know what might come. November. I know the beginning of November here in Australia is incredibly busy, but I would love to make one of these shows, if not a couple, and just experience Little Angels for the first time. Look, Toby, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. I know we've gone in depth in some places and we've skimmed in others, but your career as a whole is something that I've followed all the way through, even to Wayward Sons. So,
Thank you.
it's been an absolute pleasure to catch up with you. And I've got to admit, probably the icing on the cake for your shows, and this is nothing against you guys, is that Luke Morley is opening for you from Thunder.
Oh yeah. Well, honestly, he was the first sort of idea we had. Because Luke, Thunder and us we were never rivals. We were always good friends. They were, they play a different type of music to us in lots of ways. So it never really crossed the streams. And I think. When we were talking about doing the tour, Luke came up. I mean, because of Dan, he's still in recovery from his injuries and from his stroke. It's Thunder are on hiatus, and of course Luke wants to carry on playing. And we sort of said to him, "Look, man, we would be honoured, and it is the right word, to have you on this tour." And he very graciously accepted. And we I'll be at the side of the stage watching. I think he's a remarkable guitar player, and he's a lovely human being. absolutely love. He's such a lovely guy, and I've Thunder have done a lot for me. I mean, when I was doing my solo touring and back in the 2000s,
2006.
Danny,
Yeah,
yeah, they had me on tour with them all the time, and so I've got a massive amount of respect for those guys, and so it's only right and proper that I reciprocate on that one. So yeah, I can't wait. I think it's going to be a great night for anyone who attends the shows. Because he's going to play Thunder songs. They're going to play some Thunder tunes, of course. People are going to hear us do a deep dive into our career. It's not just going to be the hits. We've got some real great ideas going on, I think, for revisiting some old tunes. So I think those that are into that era, that's the kind of thing. If you're into
yeah,
that era like you are, I think you're going to get a really great night. And it's not just going to be about reminiscing and just about nostalgia. I want this to be about a fresh restart,
yeah,
almost like a reclaiming of the land, if you like.
yeah.
And that's the way we're looking at it. Yeah.
Incredible stuff. Again, thank you, Toby, for your time. I look, if you'd be willing to, should there be new music arise and on the horizon, and there's something else to talk about, then I'd love to talk to you again and the other guys. But thank you again for your time and for your generosity, and it's been an absolute pleasure catching up with you.
Oh no,
I hope you've enjoyed
mate.
it too, my friend.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine. It's a delight. It's just, you know what? It's just great to know that people still care. It really is, and it's wonderful to hear all your memories of it as well. And it does an old rocker's heart very good, I can tell you. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right, Toby. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and you never know, we might see you in November.
Absolutely, that'd be my pleasure. You take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.